What's up, everybody? Manic here with lesson 2 of the editing tutorials for Sony Vegas. Um, Fresh off the bat of the video of lesson 1, we are going to look at perhaps the second most important thing that you want to look at for producing your videos. So we looked at the basic functions of Sony Vegas last time. This time we want to look at making videos of quality. Before we do anything fancy with editing, we want to know how to produce good quality videos, whether it be for YouTube or whatever it is that you need it for. Running with the theme of last time, we're going to use this video again. And you may have noticed that this box is different. I'm going to just change that back to show you what I've done. So we're going to use a new button here that we didn't use last time. It's this shortcut here for properties in the top left. Now last time this was set to 640 by 480. So what's the relevance of this? Well, most PS1 games are by standard have an aspect ratio of 4:3. What is aspect ratio, you may ask? I mean, you may know, but I'll just tell you in case you don't. Aspect ratio, if you're looking at your monitor right now, your monitor will have an aspect ratio. It may be, as mine is, 1920 by 1080, which is an aspect ratio of 16 to 9. 1920 by 1080 being the res, the aspect ratio being 16 to 9. What that means is that basically the width, which is the long side, is longer than the short side at an aspect ratio of 16 to 9. This video here, by default, was recorded in a 4:3 aspect ratio, being 640 by 480, and it creates this square shape. That would be, so take away the black bars for now, that would be 640 by 480. Now we've added this to 1920 by 1080 simply because the resolution is better. 1920 by 1080 is a higher resolution than 640 by 480. The importance of this is YouTube accepts 1920 by 1080 resolutions. It's a better quality. Your monitor may not be 1920 by 1080. You'll have to check. But what you can do is you can just Google your monitor's aspect ratios to get that right. But I would recommend 1920 by 1080 if you can. Frame rate, you want to set this to 30. By default, this will be 29.970 NTC. I don't know why, but 30 is not a default frame rate, so you want to type in. YouTube accepts videos with a frame rate of up to 60 frames per second. But as I record mainly PS1 games that only standardly run at 30 frames per second, 60 frames per second would have no effect other than to make the file size bigger. So higher frame rate means more of a bigger file size. But if you're recording a next gen game, you may want to set that to 60 if you wish, but don't say I didn't warn you, the file size will increase. We can leave the rest of this stuff here the same, 8-bit, blah, blah, blah. Full resolution rendering quality is the next one we want to look at. So this is currently set to best. So what that means is by default, Sony Vegas, before we mess with any other settings, will work towards this quality. Best, that's where it's going to work towards. Equally, you can set it to good, preview or draft. I would recommend not setting it lower than good, but good will have a lower file size than best, and yada yada yada. Preview is acceptable, but it's not good quality, I'm not going to lie. You can watch a preview style video and not be too phased, but some people will be. Some people will remark on how bad the quality is. So best or good, I'd advise. We don't need to mess with anything else. I mean, you can tick this box if you want to make sure that all of your new projects start with these settings, or equally, you can just save it as a template to load up at your whim. So we're going to click OK with that. Now, as you can see, we are said in the preview window, we have these black bars. They will appear on YouTube, and I'll show you in future episodes how to remove those black bars if you are using a 4:3 aspect ratio video like I am. But the reason why I'm not going to stretch it right now is because a stretched video of 4:3 quality will make the quality go down, and we're just focusing on the best quality possible right now. So for that, we're going to focus on that. A good way to tell what quality you want your video to look when it's done. If you go to draft and auto, draft, that's the worst quality imaginable, but it's acceptable if you're just doing some very low level editing. Reason being is while you're editing in Sony Vegas, it is using your RAM and CPU resources. The lower this is, the less of a penalty it gives to your CPU and RAM so that you can do other programs. I mean, if you've just got Sony Vegas as the only program open, then by all means set it to higher. Preview, perhaps. Preview, you can, as I said, it's lookable. You can look at it and it's not too bad. Then we want good. That's good quality. If I want to see how a video is most likely going to turn out, I will look at good. But then if you want it to make sure you want it to be as good quality as possible, you want to set that to best and full. That is an insight into how your video could look if you want to set the settings to its best. I would not advise editing while you've got this set to best, because it will slow down your computer unless you've got an amazing CPU and a lot of RAM. I myself only have a standard i5 processor with only 8GB of RAM, so editing on best does take its toll for me. Next up, we want to move on to the next part. We're going to just render it. We're not doing any editing, as I said. We're just focusing on getting a good quality video. Look out for future episodes for that. What we want to do is, if you remember, we was looking at where is it? Oh, it's right here. Okay, we was looking at Sony AVC, MVC, MP4. We want to keep that file type. You want to go to, I recommended last time, the 1280 by 720 30p. We want the best quality, so we're going to go to 1920 by 1080 30p. We don't want to just leave that as default though. We want to customize it. Now, what you do is click on that and click customize template, but I've made one earlier, so I'm just going to show you what I made. Change the template name to perhaps YouTube if it's going to be for YouTube, and click save. And here's what the settings you want to have. You want the video format, AVC, make sure that's not set to memory stick. Then you want to make sure the frame rate here is set to 30 as well, so that that's no different. Pixel aspect ratio, leave as 1. This is the most important part of the tutorial, looking at the bit rate. If you set that to 1 million, it will look draft quality. Set this to 5 million, it'll look kind of how it did in the preview quality. 8 is good quality. For PS1 games or any kind of old gen games, I would recommend 8 million as an acceptable bitrate. 10 million is what YouTube recommends and is more than good enough for next gen games, etc. You can set this all the way up to, I think YouTube now accepts in the 30s. I think it's 32 million, but don't quote me on that. It's around that kind of level. But I would highly recommend that you do not set it to 32 million, purely because the render time of 32 million and the file size that comes out of it is astronomical. Just to give you a hint, I mean, I usually do 2 to 3 hour videos if you look at our channel, but just to give you an example of what that kind of level is, a 1 minute video at 32 million bit rate, it took my computer about an hour and a half to render that 1 minute. It's a bit of an exaggeration actually, it took close to an hour. An hour to render a 1 minute video at 32, and it did look great quality, I'm not going to lie, but that 1 minute video also had the file size of a 15-minute video. So that just gives you the idea of what you're looking at. So if you've got a 10-minute video, you're going to be rendering all day at this quality. And usually it takes me about 2-3 days to render a 2 to 3 hour video at 8 million quality. So just to explain what bitrate is, in case you actually care what bitrate is, that's the quality of your pixels essentially. And because, as I said, PS1 games, they're old, let's face it, the graphics aren't great to start with. Therefore, we don't really need to worry about there being lots of pixels of individual colour, because there just aren't that many pixels to begin with of individual colour. You set this to 10 though, that's more appropriate for next gen games that have more pixels to take care of. So set that to wherever you want, but I would advise no lower than 5, and unless you want your computer to break from rendering, don't set it to more than 16, I'd say at worst. But by all means, it's up to you. This is the final thing we're going to look at, and I do realise I have missed perhaps something out to do with audio, so I will come back to audio just very quickly in a minute. But this is very, very, very important. If you're rendering a video that's more than 5 to 10 minutes long, this is very important. If you're not, then it applies less to you. But on encode mode, you want to click on the drop down, and it may be set to automatic at default. But it's very tempting to see render using GPU if available and click on it. Now I'm going to tell you why you shouldn't. if you're rendering a video that's more than 5 to 10 minutes long, this can be a video hair ripper breaker error. So I'll give you an example. What this setting would do, render using GPU when available. When your GPU is not in use, it will accelerate the rendering process, perhaps cutting an hour or a few hours from the rendering time, and that's very tempting. But I have had videos that have been rendering for 2-3 days get to 92%, and an error come up saying GPU accelerator failed, essentially, or something along those lines, and the whole video rendering went corrupted, and I couldn't use it. I couldn't resume it. I couldn't do anything. I had to re-render the entire thing. So unless you're rendering only a short video, ensure this is set to rendering using CPU only. I don't care how good your GPU is, it can really cause you problems, and I've only once rendered successfully with GPU acceleration enabled, and that was a 5-minute video. So my advice, stick to render using CPU only. That's the bottom line. Use the other one at your own risk. The last thing I'm going to say then, it was to do with audio, and you may need to go back to properties as well for this, and I'll quickly show you in properties in a second. But in properties, there's also, you add the video tab, and there's also an audio tab. 48,000 is CD quality, and it's set to only allow me up to 48,000 because that's what the properties are set as. But that will be listed with more if possible. 48,000 is what I use though. It's CD quality, as I said. You can up the audio quality if you want. The way that is increased on this render as well as elsewhere, you need to go back to properties, and I'm sorry I missed this out and we're backtracking. Go to audio. Make sure you can set this up to wherever you want. Higher quality will be guaranteed as you, well no sorry that's wrong. Higher quality is what the numbers suggest, but sometimes I have set the audio quality to higher and I've not noticed a blind bit of difference in the audio quality. So increasing it will make your file size bigger and the rendering time longer again. But if audio is really important to you and the audio is not great to begin with, set that higher to make up for it. You want to click OK, and if I had that set to higher, then when I go to the render settings, I could render it with higher quality audio as well. That it would be listed in the drop down. So what you then do is just click your render and wait for it to render and see. You may want to just render. This is what I usually do as a good piece of advice. What you can do, and I wasn't going to show you this until a later tutorial, but what you could do is, using your timeline, you can drag a blue bar across. And the way I've done that is I've just put a link on the timeline and dragged it like so. Then go to File, Render As, fill out all the settings that you want as we did before, and as you can see, this is ticked as Rend Loop Region Only. This off means that we want to render the entire video, which we do when we want the entire video to be rendered. But this is a good way of checking your quality, is just to click Render Loop Region Only. That's telling the video to only render this section that's highlighted, and then click Render. Then, once it's rendered, find the video, watch it. Is it the quality you want? If it is, great, render the entire video at that quality. If it's not, then make changes and do it again. It's better to spend 10-15 minutes rendering a short clip of your video and it being what you want than it is rendering the entire video at settings, opening it after 6-7 hours of rendering and it not be the quality that you want. So that's this tutorial on quality. I hope it has been of some use to you. I know it's been longer than the last tutorial and it's longer than I wanted it to be, but I really hope that it is of use to you. Next time, lesson 3, we'll be looking at actually starting some editing, some very basic editing that anyone can do. Lesson 4, I've kind of planned out where I want to go. So lesson 3, basic editing, we want to start looking at different stuff on the user interface, and then by lesson 5 we'll be looking at some cool stuff, hopefully. And by all means, if you're watching this video and those videos are already out and you consider yourself a bit more better at Sony Vegas than your average Joe, then by all means skip ahead episodes. But thank you very much for watching. If this has helped you, then please give it a like, and see you on the next episode.